everyone, my name is Tori. This is Novel Life. Welcome back to my channel, and welcome to my February reading wrap up. In the month of February, I read 12 books, which is a little bit lower for me, but I had a really good reading month, or what I would call a really good reading month. I had a huge audiobook month. I read 10 audiobooks. 10 is so much, but like primarily I listen to a lot of audiobooks because I can still work sometimes. I can still cook. I can still clean stuff. Like I can still carry on and do things that I don't really want to do because I'd rather be reading, but I can read while listening to my audiobook. That's how we get around adulting in my house. Anyway, so I had 10 audiobooks and I had 2 ebooks, no physical books. Even though I do have the stack of physical books next to me, I try to read down my physical TBR or like get the audiobook or ebook if I can, because holding a paperback or hardback is not in the cards for me. So for page count, I had 5,461 pages read. That is just what the Kindle version or like Goodreads says, which I think is pretty accurate. For genre breakdown, I had 4 romance, 6 romantasy, and 2 fantasy. I have been in such a fantasy and romantasy mood. I don't know why. It's carried over into March, and that's really all I want to read. I don't know if it's just because it's such an escape for me to just dive into a world that's not our own. Sometimes contemporary romances, as you'll see, haven't hit as much for me in the month of February, so I don't really know how many I'm going to read in March, but it's going to be a heavy fantasy and romantasy reading, vlogs, wrap-ups, anything like that, because that's what I'm in the mood for. Sorry, not sorry. For a breakdown of star rating, I had 4 5-star reads, 4 4-stars, 2 3.5 stars, and 2 3 stars. I did have 2 DNFs, but they're more like soft DNFs, so I don't really count those. I just know that I did DNF 2 books in the month of February. So yeah, it's books that I'll go back to for sure. That's all the statistics I have for you. So let's go ahead and dive into all the books I read and chat about what I thought about them. So the first book that I read in February was Unloved by Peyton Koren. This was an anticipated release for me. It was one of the most anticipated books of the year for me. It definitely lived up to the hype for me. I don't know why. I just really enjoyed this book. I've talked about it in countless videos. I've chatted about it. I recommend it to everyone. I think Peyton Koren can write so well, and she really just dives into the characters' emotions, the characters' development, and your own emotions, and you really get attached to these characters, but in the best way. Now, if you love a friends to lovers romance, this book is for you. I loved it. Now, this is a little different than Unsteady because it is more friends to lovers. It's just as emotional, but in a different way. She's his tutor. He is dealing with a bunch of different learning disabilities like dyslexia, dyscalculia. He also has ADHD, and the college doesn't actually give him the correct accommodations. Then again, he hasn't really spoke out about that, but when his tutor finds out, who's our female character, she's like, hold please, I'm gonna fix this. I love their romance. I love their relationship. I love the dynamics. I love the characters. Honestly, I just loved everything about this book, and I want more people to read it because I loved it so much. The next book I read was An Ember in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir. So this is my first book by Sabaa Tahir. Now this is more of a YA fantasy series, and I was very taken back by the beginning of this book. So many people died in like the first 10%. I was like, what? How is this? Why? What is happening? It was pretty brutal, but I love the world that Sabaa Tahir created in this book. I did give this 4 stars, and I could see the potential of where it's going. Like I said in a reading vlog, I said it right before it actually happened. In this book, you're following our 2 main characters, and they're like on like parallel paths, and you were waiting in this book for them to cross, and they cross in not the way that I was thinking at all. There was a lot of twists and turns in here that I did not see coming, but I'm thoroughly surprised by how much I loved this book, that I bought this second book, and I do have it on my TBR for March, so I will be reading it at some point. But I do really like this series. I love the characters, I love the world, I love the writing. There's a lot of things that I do love about it, so I could definitely see that there's a 5-star in this series. I just don't know which of the 4 books is going to be a 5-star for me, but I definitely want to continue. I'm really loving these new covers too, so I'm glad I'm collecting these, but this was really what started my romantasy. I was like, oh, I'm feeling this. I am feeling this. The next book I read was actually an ARC, and it's a contemporary romance, and that is On Love Rosaline by Samantha Young. So I received this limited edition ARC, which was so kind of Valentine and Samantha Young for sending this to me. I also had an ALC, so I was listening to it. I loved the audiobook. I do think me not being in the biggest contemporary mood really hindered my reading, but I still went ahead and read it because I was connected to the characters. I will say my main thing with this book is I loved the mental health rep in this book. It is one of my favorites. I always love a good mental health, and I think Samantha Young really hit it on the head with this, of her anxiety, her panic attacks, the shame that comes with having anxiety and panic attacks, and how you don't really want to tell anyone, even your family, because you don't want to feel like a burden. Like, it's all there, and I really enjoyed that talk. Now, this is more of an enemies to lovers romance. It's kind of second chance, but not really. They kind of fake date too. So there's a lot of tropes in here that I think a lot of people will love. I ended up giving it like 3.5, 4 stars. I landed at a 3.5. I did love the audiobook. If you can get the audiobook, definitely listen to it. This also takes place in Scotland. They're both Scottish, so I thought that was fun. But this is the first book in her Return to Dublin series. So if you're a fan of the On Dublin Street series, then you'll be a fan of this one. I did pick up one more contemporary romance, and that was Deep End by Ali Hazelwood. This book had people in an uproar at the beginning of February, let me tell you. So I was actually reading this, and then I saw all this discourse about, well, I will say, I started reading it and I soft DNF'd it. I was like, I'm not in the mood for a contemporary romance. I know I'm not feeling this book. Like, I'm interested, but I'm like, I could put it down and pick it up and have like no problem with that. It's going to take me forever to read it. So I put it down. Okay. And then I saw all this discourse, people saying it's spicy, but not spicy. There's BDSM, there's not BDSM. And I was like, what in the world is happening? So I decided to pick it up for myself. I do have a reading vlog reading this book along with some other books, but I picked up this book and I was like, it's a romance. Why are people all mad about it? I think it's because Ali Hazelwood is so widely popular now that a lot of people who don't necessarily read romance or even like spicier romances pick her up, and they picked up this book and they were thoroughly shocked by the contents that was in it. I was like, she gives you an author's note saying that this is going to be spicy. Why are you surprised? So I ended up giving this 4 stars. It was fine. It was an interesting premise. It's a forbidden romance between 2 swimming team people. Like, she's a diver, he's a swimmer. His ex is on the team. They break up because he's into kinky shit and the ex doesn't want to do that. It's very wild and kind of a little weird, if I'm going to be honest. I give it 4 stars. It was a fun time. It was a spicy romance. The end. And then I went into a dark fantasy romance series that I was in the middle of, so I decided to pick up these chunky books. Oh my god, they're so heavy. Storms of Secrets and Sorrow, and then I listened to Tempest of Wrath and Vengeance. I listened to the audiobooks, and I kind of like read along on my Kindle. I bought these paperbacks after. These are chunky. These are like 600-700 pages of books, and the 4th book in the series is not out yet, but I ended up giving both of these 5 stars. I can't really talk about what happens in these books because it would be spoilers, but I did give Reign of Shadows and Endings, which is the first book in this series. I read at the end of last year. I gave it 4 stars, but I see what she was doing with that first book, so now I want to go back and reread because I feel like, one, I would pick up on a lot of fantasy stuff, but also I would have a very different rating. I would probably rate it higher, but I love these. They're called dark fantasy romances, like fantasy romance series. It's on the dark-ish side, but it's not like the darkest ones that I read. But I would highly suggest picking these up. These are so heavy, guys. I would highly suggest picking up this series if you're a romantasy reader. I think so many people would love it, and I love these characters, like Theon and Luca. But Theon, man, the ending of the 3rd book really got me, and I was like, I love Theon. I see what he's doing. I see you, Theon. I'm with you, and I love you. Anyway, I also love Tessa's journey in here too. It's also really good. I did read Shadows and Storms by Helen Shore, which is the 4th book in the Legends of Thesmar series. Like I said, I read through some series that I was in the middle of, and I definitely wanted to finish the series because I want to get to Iron and Embers, which is actually on my March TBR, which is the first book in the Ashes of Thesmar series. And because I had 1 book left in this series, I wanted to read this one before going on to the next series. They're kind of interconnected series, but you do not have to read. Like, you do not have to start from the beginning and read the Legends of Thesmar series before going into Iron and Embers. A lot of people like have their opinions, but the author said you don't have to, you just get more out of it. So I was just in the middle of it and I wanted to finish it. I ended up giving this 4 stars. This whole series has been 4 stars for me. I think actually I gave this more of like a 3.5, 4 stars. But that's because I was coming off of the Dark Romantic series, the Legacy series by Melissa K. Rourke. Like, I read this right after, and I was like, this just doesn't hit the same because they're not the same series. This is not a dark romance series at all. So, yeah, it's just, like, hard to compare them, but it's hard not to compare when you're reading back to back, if that makes sense. So, while I did enjoy this series, I would recommend it. I have high hopes for Iron and Embers, but I love the found family in this book. This really just wrapped up a lot of things, and I was not mad about it. I love these characters. Then I started on my Plated Prisoner series, I read Guild by Raven Kennedy. So this is the first book in the Played and Prisoner series. There is 6 books. I ended up giving this book 3.5 stars. The audiobook's only 9 hours. It is not that long. Now, this is supposed to be a fantasy romance series. I don't think there's any romance in this book. I say that she is in love with the King Midas. Obviously, it's more of a, what is this? Just Stockholm Syndrome kind of love where she is just like thankful he saved her, quote unquote, and put her in this cage. And she's like unraveling all these things about what's happening. And so she has this like kind of toxic relationship with him. It's very interesting. I'm very intrigued. I would definitely call this a darker fantasy romance just from the first book, but I know the books get thicker and thicker and thicker. I do have the audiobooks for books 2 and 3, so I'm definitely going to read those and see how I feel about the series. I like to give at least 2 to 3 books in a series to see if it's for me. And I think that this will be for me. It's just like, when will I find time to read a 6-book series? When in my life, when I want to read anything and everything, I want to read everything all the time. Like, when do I have time? You know what I mean? But I ended up giving this 3.5 stars. I think it's a solid start to the series, and I can't wait to see where this goes. I did pick up 7 Days in June by Tia Williams. This has been on my radar for I feel like 2 years now. I really wanted to read the second book in this series, but I'm a series girly. I like to start at the beginning. I mean, they're all interconnected standalones, but this one I picked up because I pulled a prompt on out of my TBR jar with a disability or chronic illness, I think it was. She has chronic migraines, and let me tell you, she really dives into what it's like to have chronic illness, but to have like a chronic pain disorder, like chronic migraines, she really goes in. There's a line that stuck with me. So it's kind of like a second chance romance, but she was married and she does have a daughter. They're now divorced, but she said a line that her husband, her ex-husband, told her was, "When I married you, I wanted a wife, not a patient." And that really hit me. It really stuck with me. I was going to the doctor for a lot of different like chronic illness problems myself throughout while I was reading this. So it really just hit harder. I ended up giving this 5 stars. It is a beautiful book. Not only the way that she writes a romance, the way that she writes character development, it really hits for me. It reminds me of Peyton Curran's writing with how just raw and honest she is with writing these characters and their story. And I thought it was beautiful. I thought it was amazing. All I put was second chance and emotional because I was very emotional while reading it. But I will say, I think that's because I was going through like my own, like going back to the doctor and doing all those things. And so it hit me, but I really loved it. And I cannot wait to pick up the other book in this series that's kind of like, oh my gosh, I can't think of the name. I'm blanking on the name. It was published last year, but I definitely want to get to it. I'm definitely putting her higher on my TBR because I want to read more by her. Then I finally finished out the Hades and Persephone series by Scarlett St. Clair. So this was just a book that I really, really wanted to read and finally in this series. I've been reading this series since 2019, which is a very, very, very long time. It's been 6 or 7 years now. I love this series. I love Hades. I love Persephone. I love the character development of Persephone throughout this whole series. It's one of my favorite things about her and Scarlett St. Clair's writing. With all that being said, I did give this 3 stars. I gave the last 2 books in the series 3 stars. I just feel like it was very dragged out, but not dragged out as like, oh, she could have just put it into 2 books. There was just a lot happening in this world that kind of led to these moments in the last 2 books. So it was just a lot for her to work through as the author, like the wars, the this, the gods, the that, the political stuff with all of the gods and this and that. And it was just a lot. There's a lot of characters in play. I do love all the characters. It's like a found family aspect too. So like I said, I'm just really nostalgic to these characters and that's why I wanted to finish them. And I'm a fan of this series. Do I think it's for everyone? Absolutely not. But I'm just someone who I really enjoyed this series because I've been reading it for so long and I have such vivid memories of reading this series. So I did finish it, gave it 3 stars, finished out the series. And I'm very happy about that because that's another series that's completed that I finished and I can like check off in my reading journal. And then I read Of Blades and Wings by Eliza Reign. So this is my first book by Eliza Reign. I ended up giving this 3 stars. I didn't know until I was about 40-ish% through this book that this is a first in a trilogy. And when I figured that out, I knew we were not going anywhere. I knew we were not going anywhere with this book. I knew that we weren't going to get a lot with the romance. I knew we were still going to have like questions about the hero, Cain, who is this like Valkyrie, but has his wings torn off, but he still has his like shadow animal, I guess you could call it. And it was okay. I don't think that I'm going to continue. As much as I'm intrigued, I do want to continue. I just don't think this kind of fantasy romance series is for me. I like a little bit more depth. She really stays in the middle of the like training area where she's training to be Valkyrie, and she doesn't leave that, so it doesn't lend to a lot of like fantasy world and stuff like that. I don't know if she leaves and it explores more throughout the series, but because I gave it 3 stars, I'm not like drawn to it. I'm like, I'll leave it. I don't need to start another series if I don't have to. So that's a series I'm probably not going to finish unless I find, you know, a review of the 2nd or 3rd book that makes me want to pick it up, but not the best for me, and it was okay. Not the best, but not the worst. And then I ended February with The Rose Bargain by Sasha Payton Smith. So this is more of a YA historical kind of fantasy. I feel timid to say fantasy because the fantasy world and the fantasy aspects does not play in until way later in the series, or way later in the book, I should say. I also did not know that this was the first in a duology or first in a series, so it definitely ends on a major cliffhanger. I'm intrigued enough with this series to pick up the next book whenever it comes out. This is a new release. It came out in February. I ended up giving this 4 stars. I really liked it. Like I said, if you're a fan of historical romance, this gives that vibe of coming out in the ton and, you know, announcing her coming out and trying to find a husband and families getting ruined and not having land and having their land taken away and going bankrupt and going broke and all this stuff like that. It's very historical in that way. And she is kind of stuck between 2 brothers, the prince and then like the bastard child, like his brother. So it's very interesting. I don't want to say too much. That's all I knew going in, but I did enjoy this one. I gave it 4 stars, but just know that it is YA and there's light fantasy. I think the next book will definitely have more fantasy aspects, but definitely like fantasy. But those are the 12 books I read in February. You can let me know your favorite read of February in the comments down below. If you've made it this far and you want to let me know, leave me a flower emoji because it's March and that means spring is coming and I'm so excited. I can wear t-shirts again because it's not freezing here. But thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe for more content from me. As always, I hope you're living a novel life and I will see you in my next one. Bye guys.